This is a lecture on Gerard Hauser's second chapter, which is entitled Rhetorical Thinking. These first couple of chapters in Hauser are an attempt to answer the question, what is rhetoric? I want you to keep in mind that there are many definitions for this term, and that these definitions are not unique, but are particularly Hauser's. He is compiling these definitions from several places. He usually makes you pretty clearly aware of where he's going for the definitions. In this chapter, he's relying heavily on Aristotle. We'll return to Aristotle later in the semester. So, what is rhetoric from this Aristotelian point of view and Hauser's version of it? Rhetoric is two things, Hauser says. It's a practical thing and a productive thing. The practical thing side of rhetoric is using language to influence actions. So making speeches, having slides or posters, that sort of thing, to affect the actions of people in a social environment. And then secondly, it's productive, which is using language to produce arguments. Now, how do we influence actions? Well, for one thing, we find an opportune moment. That opportune moment is one where a problem occurs. It's unique and it's individual, and we come up with probable answers. By probable, what we're thinking about here is that answers exist only in a space of a situation. So a problem for one person or for one community may not be a problem for another one. The solutions that one community is comfortable with may not be the solutions that another community is comfortable with. The way we influence actions is to understand all of those dynamics and to find good timing. And as we'll talk a little bit later about a situation, and I'm going to use the example of the cold weather that we're experiencing to illustrate this. So in order to influence actions, you've got to have a problem. You've got to come up with answers that are particular to that situation, to that community, to that set of events that have unfolded, everything about the situation that's unique. And you have to have an opportune moment in order to make the use of language successful. How do we produce arguments? How is rhetoric productive? Well, rhetoric is a method, Aristotle says, that helps us live in a democracy. A democracy is based on many people getting together to solve problems. Aristotle believes, we might want to say that he's naive in this belief, but I think our own country is built on this notion that if we all have a chance to persuade each other, if we all have a chance to make arguments, that in the process of making those arguments, we will arrive at workable solutions. So the dissoi logoi is the double-sided argument. We often think of the pro and con. We all know, though, that there are many more than two sides to an issue. There are usually 3 and 4. The point here for Aristotle and for Hauser is an optimism, a sense that in the process of listening to arguments, that we arrive at good answers. So it's a method, it's a way, a process that we can go through to come up with good solutions. Now, I am using for the rest of this lecture an example, an approach to summarizing this chapter that is similar to what I'm asking you to do in the critical papers, because I wanted to bring your attention to the fact that the critical papers are asking you to do something that's very helpful when it comes to understanding complex material. And that first part of the critical paper is an explication. You find a key quotation and you explicate it. So I've chosen a quotation from Hauser's chapter 2 that I think is really the bottom line of what's going on in this chapter. The most important things that Hauser says, I think, can be really focused in on these words. So here's what I've chosen for that quotation. We still face problematic situations that require common effort to be resolved. We rely on management of language to reason jointly to commonly acceptable solutions. We seek adherence and commitment. We also seek consensus. and we elicit and promote mutual cooperation. Now I'm going to break this down, which is basically what explication means, so that we can focus on what Aristotle is, or what Hauser and Aristotle are thinking about rhetoric. So we still face problematic situations that require common effort to be resolved. So there's a lot of parts to this first section. We have problematic situations. We have a problem that is dependent on situation. A problem for one situation isn't a problem for another. I'll come back and give an example in a minute. We require common effort to resolve them. So that verb require is very important, and then common effort. So this is not a problematic situation for one person or a few people. It's a common effort in the community at large in order to resolve this problem that is very dependent on a particular situation, a time and a place and a group of people. We rely on management of language to reason jointly to commonly acceptable solutions. So the way we come up with these solutions is to manage language. Now, Aristotle's entire rhetoric is built on understanding how to manage language. So this isn't just any use of language. This is a very specific and organized use of language. This use of language for Aristotle has many principles. Some people even say rules to this. They're based on reason and rationality, giving good reasons, and we've got to all participate in that process. Both sides have to reason, or many sides have to reason. We have to do it jointly at the same time in order to find solutions that are acceptable to the group. We seek adherence and commitment. This attends to behavior. We are looking for behavior to change and for people to be committed to those changes. So not just right now, we're going to change our behavior to solve this problem, but that we're going to commit to doing it in the future as well. We also seek consensus. Consensus is broad agreement. The way consensus works is that instead of a lot of argument and knocking heads, we come to an agreement where we no longer have people being shouted out or quieted. I think in the Aristotelian view, it would be this exchange of arguments where people rationally all come together and see that this is the right answer. I think consensus at times, and particularly Aristotelian views of it, are somewhat naive in complex groups. I think it's very often the case that we can't find consensus. But consensus is something, you may have heard that term, that we build, consensus building. So it's something that we go out and we build solutions based on finding what people need and want. And then this last notion, we elicit and promote mutual cooperation. That is, we go out and ask for, and then we also tell others about this mutual cooperation. So we ask for it, and then we do things to make it possible. Now, to give an example of how that works, so we have a problematic situation here in in Illinois. I don't know why I always say that. And that is the extreme cold. And it is a problem for us that has needed common effort to resolve. It should be pointed out that this situation isn't problematic for everyone. If these same weather conditions were happening in Anchorage, Alaska, it would not be a problematic situation requiring common effort to be resolved because they're used to these temperatures and they're well equipped for it. In order to solve this problem, we have to manage our language to reason jointly to come up with an acceptable solution. Now, it may not be the case that all of us exchanged language to come up with a solution to this problem, but I think it's safe to say that the institutions that canceled school had processes either in the past week or maybe many months before where they discussed the criteria for closing schools and looked at the problems that were created. Can we have children at school? Can we get them to school in such extreme cold? Will they be endangered? Will the buses start? There's a range of problems going on. Now, note that these problems and these ways that we solve them are very unique to the situation we're in. Again, in Anchorage, there would be no worry about starting buses because they all have engine block heaters, as do most cars that sit outside. Um, Other garages, other cars are in garages that are heated. So these aren't problems for these individuals because of the situation that is there. Um, so once we understand this problem and we seek to solve it, then we seek adherence and commitment. Now, one of the things that I think makes canceling school work is if a lot of other things are canceled as well. So we do better in these contexts if my job is canceled as well as my child's school, particularly if my child's very young and needs me at home. And in fact, these can create domino effects. So if we're going to cancel the preschools and then we start moving up the ladder, then we have a greater need for some of these other places of business to be canceled. So you can see that a rhetorical solution to this problem is very unique. It's based on probability. It makes use of multiple arguments. There are arguments out there for not closing down schools. And in fact, I think that for today, it probably wasn't necessary. Once we actually saw when the weather changed and how it went, it's hard to know. But in any case, we came up with the best solution for our particular group. Now, we could say that this was successful or not, and we could talk about that in another situation. Okay, this is Hauser Chapter 2. There is a lot in Chapter 2 that I haven't talked about, but I think that this gets at the most important things that I want you to know. Let me know what questions you have.